Rain slammed violently against the towering windows of Blackthorn Manor as thunder rolled across the northern cliffs like cannon fire. The ancient estate stood proudly against the storm, its dark stone walls illuminated by flashes of lightning that made the manor appear more like a prison than a home. Inside the grand drawing room, silence weighed heavier than the storm outside. Lady Evelyn Blackthorn stood near the fireplace, her trembling fingers clasped tightly in front of a dark emerald gown. The firelight danced softly across her pale face, revealing exhaustion she had hidden for years. Her auburn curls rested neatly over her shoulders, though several loose strands clung to her damp skin after rushing through the cold corridors moments earlier. Across from her stood Duke Adrian Blackthorn. Tall, commanding, and cold as winter itself, Adrian stared at her with eyes devoid of warmth. At 34 years old, the Duke carried the sharp elegance of old aristocracy, black tailored coat, silver cufflinks, rigid posture. But there was something empty behind his handsome face. Something tired. And tonight, it looked merciless. "You will leave before sunrise." The words sliced through the room, without hesitation. Evelyn's breathing faltered slightly, though she kept her composure. She had spent 3 years learning how to survive the sharp edges of Adrian's silence. Still, hearing those words aloud hurt more than she expected. "Adrian," she began softly, "do not." His tone hardened instantly. "Do not pretend innocence now." Lightning flashed behind him, briefly illuminating the bitterness twisting across his face. For several seconds, neither spoke. The servants standing near the doorway lowered their eyes, pretending not to listen even as tension consumed the room. No one in Blackthorn Manor had ever seen the Duke so openly furious, or the Duchess so heartbreakingly calm. Adrian turned away from her and poured himself a glass of whiskey with an unsteady hand. "I defended you for years," he said coldly. "Against society, against the rumors, against my own judgment." Evelyn swallowed quietly. Rumors. The whispers had followed her since the day she married him. Lady Evelyn Hartwell, the daughter of a declining noble family, had supposedly trapped one of England's most powerful dukes into marriage. Society women mocked her behind jeweled fans during galas. Aristocratic men questioned her intentions in private clubs and candlelit halls. And Adrian, though he never publicly humiliated her before tonight, had never truly denied believing those rumors himself. Their marriage had never begun with love. 3 years earlier, the union had been arranged to stabilize social alliances between the Hartwell and Blackthorn families. Adrian had agreed out of duty after his parents' deaths left him isolated and responsible for preserving the ancient duchy. Evelyn, meanwhile, had entered Blackthorn Manor hoping kindness and patience might someday melt the icy loneliness surrounding her husband. Instead, the manor only grew colder. Adrian rarely attended meals with her. He buried himself in estate business for endless hours. Their conversations became formal routines rather than genuine connection. But despite everything, Evelyn loved him. Not because he was powerful, not because he was wealthy, but because beneath his cold exterior, she saw a wounded man terrified of losing control of the only thing left to him, the Blackthorn legacy. Unfortunately, someone else understood Adrian's fears just as well. Sebastian Blackthorn. Adrian's charming cousin leaned lazily against the doorway now, watching the scene unfold with carefully hidden satisfaction. Unlike Adrian's stern presence, Sebastian carried the polished charisma of a man who thrived in social games. And Evelyn had never trusted him. "My dear cousin merely discovered the truth before it was too late," Sebastian said smoothly. "Surely you cannot blame Adrian for protecting himself." Evelyn lifted her gaze toward him, sadness flickering in her eyes. Sebastian smiled faintly. Weeks earlier, he had presented Adrian with letters and financial documents, supposedly proving Evelyn planned to abandon the marriage after securing influence within the duchy. According to the forged evidence, she had secretly mocked Adrian to acquaintances while preparing to claim part of Blackthorn wealth for herself. The accusations were devastating, and Adrian, already consumed by distrust and pressure from high society, believed every word. Evelyn could have defended herself. She could have revealed the truth. She could have exposed the sacrifices she made quietly behind the scenes years ago when Blackthorn estate nearly collapsed under hidden debt. She could have told Adrian that while he believed he alone saved the duchy, it was actually her inheritance, the fortune left behind by her late father, that rescued Blackthorn Manor from ruin. She had sold family land, her mother's jewelry, even heirlooms passed through generations. And she had done it anonymously so Adrian would never feel humiliated or indebted. But now, standing before him tonight, she realized none of it mattered anymore. A man blinded by pain could no longer recognize love standing directly before him. Adrian placed the whiskey glass down sharply. "I know about the meetings," he said. "The letters. The plans to leave once the estate stabilized." "There were no plans," Evelyn answered quietly. "Enough." His voice thundered louder than the storm outside. For the first time, genuine hurt cracked through Evelyn's calm expression. Adrian noticed it. But years of bitterness and exhaustion hardened him against sympathy. "You were never wanted in this house," he declared coldly. "I tolerated this marriage because duty demanded it. Nothing more." The words struck like a physical blow. Even Sebastian looked momentarily surprised by the cruelty of them. Silence filled the room. Evelyn stared at Adrian for several seconds, searching desperately for any sign that he regretted what he had said. But his expression remained frozen. At last, she lowered her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. No anger, no dramatic tears, only quiet heartbreak. That frightened Adrian more than rage would have. Evelyn gave a graceful nod toward the servants. "Please prepare a carriage before dawn." The servants hesitated nervously before obeying. Sebastian stepped aside as Evelyn walked past him without another word. Her dress brushed softly against the marble floor, while thunder echoed through the manor halls. Adrian remained motionless near the fireplace. Something inside him twisted painfully as he listened to her footsteps disappear. But pride silenced whatever conscience tried to speak. Hours passed. The storm deepened across the cliffs, while most of Blackthorn Manor fell asleep beneath heavy silence. Inside her chambers, Evelyn quietly packed only the essentials into a single traveling case. She left behind expensive gowns, jewelry, and gifts tied to the Blackthorn name. None of it felt like hers anymore. Near midnight, she sat at her writing desk beside candlelight and unfolded a blank sheet of paper. For several moments, she simply stared at it. Then slowly, she began to write. Not accusations, not bitterness, only truth. Tears blurred parts of the page as she described the inheritance she sacrificed to save the duchy years ago. She admitted loving Adrian despite everything. She apologized for failing to become the wife he wanted. Most painfully of all, she wished him happiness. By the time she sealed the letter with trembling fingers, dawn approached beyond the rain-covered windows. Evelyn rose quietly and walked through the dark manor one final time. The halls felt colder than ever. She paused briefly outside Adrian's study. Light still glowed beneath the door. He was awake. For one dangerous moment, her heart begged her to enter, to tell him everything face to face, to fight for the marriage she had protected for years. But pride and pain stopped her. Instead, she slipped the letter onto his desk beside the Blackthorn family seal. Then she turned away. Outside, servants loaded her small luggage into the waiting carriage while icy rain poured from the heavens. No grand farewell came. No apology. No one stopped her. As Evelyn stepped into the carriage, she glanced once toward the towering manor windows. A place that never truly became home. Then the carriage disappeared into the storm. Inside his study, Adrian finally emerged moments later after another sleepless night buried in estate papers and whiskey. Irritated and emotionally exhausted, he moved toward his desk and froze. A single sealed letter rested beside the candlelight, written in Evelyn's delicate handwriting. Adrian stared at it silently. For reasons he could not explain, an unfamiliar unease settled heavily in his chest. Beyond the windows, thunder faded into the distance. And for the first time in years, Blackthorn Manor felt completely empty. Morning arrived beneath a sky of cold gray clouds, but Blackthorn Manor remained buried in silence. The storm had passed during the night, leaving rainwater dripping slowly from the stone gargoyles lining the estate roof. Usually, servants hurried through the halls at dawn preparing fires, breakfast trays, and the endless duties of aristocratic life. Today, even the manor itself seemed reluctant to wake. Duke Adrian Blackthorn stood alone inside his study, staring at the sealed letter resting on his desk. Evelyn's handwriting curved delicately across the envelope. For nearly an hour, he had ignored it. Instead, he poured coffee he never drank and attempted to bury himself in estate ledgers. But every few moments, His eyes drifted back toward the letter, as though something inside it breathed quietly beneath the paper. Finally, with growing irritation, Adrian snatched it from the desk. "This changes nothing," he muttered. Yet his fingers tightened strangely against the seal before breaking it open. The scent of lavender lingered faintly from the paper. Evelyn's scent. Adrian immediately hated the way his chest reacted to it. Then he began to read. "Adrian, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. I do not write to defend myself because I know your mind has already decided who I am. Perhaps nothing I say now will matter. But there are truths I cannot carry silently any longer." Adrian's jaw tightened. His eyes continued scanning the page. 3 years ago, when the Blackthorn estate faced collapse after the Northern investments failed, your advisors believed bankruptcy was unavoidable. You never knew because the debt was hidden from you until a solution could be found. I sold my father's inheritance to cover those losses. The Duke froze. His eyes reread the sentence twice. Then a third time. A cold sensation crawled down his spine. The Hartwell lands were already fading after my father's death, but there remained enough wealth to save Blackthorn Manor quietly. I asked your solicitor to keep my involvement secret because I knew how deeply your pride was tied to protecting your family legacy. You once said losing Blackthorn would destroy what remained of your parents' memory. I could not bear seeing you suffer that pain." Adrian's breathing became uneven. Memories surfaced violently. Late nights years earlier when his financial advisors mysteriously announced the duchy had been saved by an anonymous investor. His relief. His gratitude toward fate itself. And all this time, Evelyn. His eyes moved lower down the page. "I never married you for wealth. In truth, I knew marrying you meant entering a home where I might never be loved at all. But even then, I hoped kindness might someday reach you where words could not. I do not blame you for doubting me. The world around you has taught you betrayal far more often than trust." Adrian gripped the paper harder. Something sharp and unbearable pressed painfully against his ribs. He remembered every dinner he skipped, every cold silence, every moment Evelyn waited patiently for affection he never offered. And still, she defended him even now. No anger, no hatred, only understanding. That hurt far more than accusations would have. The final lines blurred slightly before his eyes. "I am sorry for failing to become someone worthy of remaining by your side. Despite everything, loving you was never something I regretted. I sincerely pray you find happiness someday. Evelyn." The room fell silent. Adrian lowered the letter slowly. For several seconds, he simply stared ahead without moving. Then suddenly, his breathing cracked. A harsh sound escaped his throat as realization crashed over him all at once. Evelyn had loved him. Quietly, faithfully, completely. And he had destroyed her with his own hands. Adrian stumbled backward into his chair, pressing trembling fingers against his mouth. Years of emotional restraint shattered violently inside him. He saw her now in memories he once ignored. Evelyn waiting beside cold dining tables long after midnight. Evelyn secretly arranging blankets for exhausted servants during winter. Evelyn smiling softly whenever he entered a room, even when he barely acknowledged her presence. And last night, the emptiness in her eyes after he said she was never wanted. A sudden wave of guilt hit him so brutally he could barely breathe. For the first time since childhood, Adrian Blackthorn broke. The proud Duke buried his face in one shaking hand while tears of shame burned his eyes. Outside the study doors, servants exchanged worried glances as heavy silence stretched inside. Hours later, Adrian emerged from the room looking pale and exhausted. The letter remained clenched tightly in his hand. "Where's Sebastian?" he asked coldly. A servant hesitated. "The Lord is preparing to depart for London this afternoon, Your Grace." "Tell him to wait." The servant immediately hurried away. Adrian walked through the manor corridors slowly, noticing things he had ignored for years. Fresh flowers arranged near windows. Books neatly organized in reading rooms. Warm blankets distributed to staff during winter. Every trace of comfort throughout Blackthorn Manor carried Evelyn's touch. And he had never once thanked her for any of it. A deep sickness settled inside him. By afternoon, Adrian entered the estate archives where elderly housekeeper Mrs. Whitmore sorted records. The old woman stiffened nervously at his presence. "Your Grace." Adrian studied her carefully. "You knew," he said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore lowered her eyes. "Knew what, Your Grace?" That Evelyn saved this estate. Silence. Then slowly, the old housekeeper nodded. Tears gathered in her tired eyes. She begged all of us not to tell you, Mrs. Whitmore whispered. The Duchess said your pride was wounded enough already after your parents passed. She never wanted you to feel indebted to her. Adrian looked away sharply. Every word cut deeper. She sold nearly everything she owned, the woman continued softly. Even her mother's pearls. The Duke closed his eyes briefly. He remembered Evelyn wearing fewer jewels over the years. He never questioned why. God! What had he done? A darker realization followed immediately after. If Evelyn told the truth, then Sebastian lied. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. Within hours, he ordered private investigators to re-examine every financial document Sebastian had provided. Loyal estate solicitor Henry Cavill nervously assisted, revealing inconsistencies Adrian previously ignored. Forged signatures, altered correspondence, invented witnesses. The deeper Adrian searched, the uglier the truth became. Sebastian had manipulated everything, and Adrian allowed it. That evening, Blackthorn Manor hosted a royal charity gathering attended by wealthy nobles from across northern England. Crystal chandeliers illuminated grand halls filled with elegant dresses, polished shoes, and poisonous gossip. Normally Adrian tolerated these events with cold indifference. Tonight, fury burned beneath every step he took. Sebastian stood confidently near the ballroom staircase entertaining guests with charming smiles. He looked entirely unbothered, until Adrian approached him before half the aristocracy. "Enjoying yourself?" Adrian asked coldly. Sebastian smirked lightly, trying to survive another dreadful social evening. Adrian suddenly slammed forged documents onto the nearby table. The sound silenced surrounding conversations instantly. Sebastian's smile disappeared. "You forged the letters," Adrian said loudly. Murmurs erupted throughout the ballroom. "Adrian," Sebastian warned quietly, "you manipulated estate records. You lied about Evelyn." Several nobles exchanged shocked looks. Sebastian attempted recovery. "You cannot seriously believe." "I believed you once already," Adrian interrupted sharply. "That mistake nearly cost me everything." The room fell deathly silent. For the first time publicly, Adrian spoke Evelyn's name without bitterness. She was more loyal to this family than either of us deserved. Sebastian's calm mask finally cracked. "You pathetic fool," he hissed. "Do you think society will respect a duke weak enough to beg forgiveness from a discarded wife?" Adrian stepped closer. "No," he said quietly, "but I no longer care what society respects." Those words stunned even Adrian himself, because they were true. For years he built his entire life around pride, reputation, and emotional distance, and it left him completely alone. Sebastian attempted to retaliate by exposing Blackthorn's near bankruptcy years earlier, hoping humiliation would weaken Adrian publicly. Instead, Adrian answered without shame. "Yes," he admitted before the gathering. The duchy nearly collapsed, and the woman I wrongly cast aside was the one who saved it. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Sebastian realized too late that Adrian no longer feared humiliation. That made him impossible to control. By midnight, Sebastian left the estate in disgrace while whispers consumed high society. But Adrian barely noticed, because none of it mattered beside one terrible truth. Evelyn was gone. The next morning, Adrian began searching for her. Days turned into weeks. He traveled through villages, estates, countryside inns, and neighboring towns carrying only Evelyn's letter and fading hope. Sometimes he arrived moments too late after hearing rumors of a young noblewoman traveling alone. Each failure deepened his regret. But something unexpected happened during the search. Adrian began changing. Without Evelyn beside him, he noticed suffering more clearly. Hungry tenant families, overworked servants, children without shoes during winter. Things Evelyn always cared about. Slowly, Adrian started helping them. Not for reputation, not for praise, but because for the first time, he understood the compassion Evelyn carried naturally. One snowy evening, while staying at a coastal inn several counties away, Adrian received new information from an elderly traveler. "Auburn-haired lady," the man asked thoughtfully. "Teaches children near Rosemir Cove, I believe. Keeps to herself mostly." Adrian's heart nearly stopped. Rosemir Cove. A small town beside the sea. Hope surged painfully through him for the first time in weeks. Clutching Evelyn's letter tightly inside his coat pocket, Adrian mounted his horse before dawn. Heavy fog rolled across the cliffs as he rode toward the distant coast, toward the woman he had broken, and toward the only chance left to become the man she once believed he could be. A love worth fighting for. Cold ocean wind swept across the cliffs as Duke Adrian Blackthorn rode into Rosemir Cove beneath a pale winter sunrise. The coastal town was nothing like the grand aristocratic world he came from. There were no towering mansions, no marble halls, only narrow cobblestone streets, weathered fishing homes, and the distant sound of crashing waves against dark rocks below the cliffs. Lanterns still glowed faintly outside small bakeries while fishermen prepared their boats in the harbor. For the first time in his life, Adrian felt completely out of place, and completely terrified, because after weeks of searching, he was finally close enough to lose her forever. He dismounted near a modest stone church overlooking the sea. Children's laughter drifted from a nearby schoolhouse carried softly by the wind. Then Adrian saw her. Evelyn stood near the entrance beside several small children wrapped in winter scarves. Her auburn hair moved gently in the ocean breeze while sunlight touched the soft features he had spent countless sleepless nights remembering. But something about her had changed. She looked peaceful. Not happy exactly, but free. The children crowded around her as she handed them books and laughed softly at something one little girl said. It was the first genuine smile Adrian had seen from her in years, and he realized with painful clarity that Blackthorn Manor had stolen that light from her. Adrian remained frozen across the street. Evelyn slowly looked up. The moment her eyes met his, the smile vanished. Shock crossed her face first, then guarded sadness. The children noticed the tension immediately and quietly hurried inside the schoolhouse. For several seconds, neither moved. Finally, Adrian stepped closer. Evelyn. His voice sounded rougher than he intended. Evelyn held the schoolhouse door tightly beside her. You found me. Not warmth. Not anger. Only quiet exhaustion. Adrian nodded slowly. I've been searching for weeks. You should not have. I had to. A painful silence stretched between them while ocean waves crashed below the cliffs. Evelyn looked different from the woman who left Blackthorn Manor. Simpler clothes replaced expensive gowns. Her dark green coat showed signs of wear from daily life in the small town. Yet somehow, she appeared more alive than she ever had inside the duchy. Adrian hated himself for realizing he had only truly seen her after losing her. I read your letter, he said carefully. Evelyn lowered her gaze. I assumed you eventually would. Why didn't you tell me the truth sooner? A faint, sad smile touched her lips. Would you have believed me? The question shattered him, because he knew the answer immediately. No. Back then, he would not have believed her. Adrian stepped closer, emotion tightening painfully in his chest. I was wrong. Evelyn's eyes glistened slightly, but she remained composed. You did not merely make a mistake, Adrian, she whispered softly. You looked at me after 3 years together and believed I was incapable of loving you honestly. Every word carried quiet heartbreak rather than anger. That made it worse. I know, he admitted. For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackthorn offered no excuses. No pride. No defense. Only truth. I became the very thing I hated most, he said quietly. Cruel. Suspicious. Cold. Evelyn looked away toward the sea. You broke something in me that night. Those words nearly brought him to his knees. Before Adrian could answer, a strong gust of wind swept across the cliffs. Instinctively, Evelyn pressed a hand gently against her stomach beneath her coat. Adrian noticed immediately. His eyes widened slightly. Evelyn froze. Silence fell between them. Then slowly, understanding hit him. Evelyn. His voice cracked. You. She closed her eyes briefly before answering. Yes. The world seemed to stop around him. A child. Their child. 1,000 emotions collided inside Adrian at once. Shock, joy, guilt, wonder, fear, and overwhelming shame. Because Evelyn had faced this alone. After everything he said to her, Adrian stared at her, trembling slightly. You should have told me. Tears finally gathered in Evelyn's eyes. You told me I was never wanted in your house, she whispered. I could not bear hearing those words spoken to our child one day too. The pain in her voice destroyed whatever remained of Adrian's pride. He looked away sharply, overcome with guilt. "I do not deserve your forgiveness," he admitted quietly, "but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." Evelyn studied him carefully. The old Adrian would have demanded obedience, demanded explanations, demanded control. But the man standing before her now looked exhausted, humbled, and deeply broken by regret. Still, pain could not disappear overnight. "I cannot return with you," she said softly. Adrian nodded slowly despite the ache in his chest. "I understand." And surprisingly, he meant it. He did not come to Rosemir Cove to force her home. He came because he loved her too much now to continue hiding from the truth. So Adrian stayed. Days turned into weeks. Instead of returning immediately to Blackthorn Manor, Adrian rented a modest room above the harbor bakery. The townspeople whispered endlessly about the mysterious nobleman lingering around Rosemir Cove, but Adrian ignored them. For the first time in his privileged life, he lived quietly among ordinary people. And slowly, he began changing even more. He helped fishermen repair storm-damaged boats. He funded repairs for leaking village roofs anonymously. He carried wood for elderly widows during winter mornings. Most importantly, he never pressured Evelyn. Every day, he simply showed up. At the schoolhouse, at the orphan shelter, at church gatherings. Sometimes Evelyn barely spoke to him. Sometimes they shared quiet conversations while walking beside the sea. And slowly, carefully, she began seeing sincerity where pride once existed. One snowy afternoon, Adrian arrived at the orphanage carrying medicine after several children fell ill with fever. Evelyn watched silently as he spent hours helping frightened children despite clearly having no experience around them. One little boy tugged Adrian's sleeve nervously. "Are you really a duke?" Adrian blinked awkwardly before nodding. The child frowned thoughtfully. "You don't act scary." Evelyn almost smiled for the first time in weeks. Adrian noticed immediately. And that tiny smile meant more to him than every royal honor he had ever received. Meanwhile, news from London finally arrived. Sebastian Blackthorn's crimes had fully unraveled. Authorities uncovered forged estate documents, financial fraud, and attempts to illegally seize portions of Blackthorn inheritance. High society turned against him almost overnight. Many expected Adrian to destroy Sebastian publicly in revenge. Instead, Adrian simply allowed the law to handle him. No cruelty, no vengeance, because hatred no longer controlled him the way it once had. Winter slowly faded into early spring along the coast. One evening, Rosemir Cove held its annual seaside lantern festival. Villagers gathered near the cliffs, while hundreds of glowing lanterns illuminated the ocean beneath the stars. Music drifted softly through the air as children laughed and danced along the harbor. Evelyn stood quietly near the water wrapped in a cream-colored shawl, her hand resting gently over the small curve of her stomach. Adrian approached slowly beside her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he looked toward the sea and said quietly, "Blackthorn Manor feels empty without you." Evelyn's eyes softened slightly. It always felt empty. Adrian nodded painfully. "Yes," he admitted, "because I made it that way." He turned toward her fully. "You were the only person who ever brought warmth into that house, and I was too blind to see it." Emotion trembled in his voice now. Not polished speeches. Not aristocratic perfection. Just honesty. "I loved you long before I understood what love truly was," Adrian whispered. "But I buried it beneath fear and pride until I nearly lost everything." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as lantern light flickered across the waves behind them. "I cannot erase the pain I caused," he continued softly. "But if you allow it, I would like to spend the rest of my life proving you were always wanted, always loved." For several long moments, Evelyn simply looked at him. Then finally, she stepped closer. Not because of his title, not because of promises, but because she had watched his actions for months. And they were finally stronger than his words. Adrian carefully took her hand, almost afraid she might disappear again. Evelyn squeezed it gently. And for the first time since their marriage began, neither of them felt alone. Months later, spring sunlight poured across the gardens of Blackthorn Manor. But the estate no longer resembled the cold place Evelyn once left behind. The doors stood open to villagers and orphaned children supported through Evelyn's new charitable foundation. Servants moved through the halls with laughter instead of fear. Warmth finally lived within the ancient stone walls. And at the center of it all stood Adrian and Evelyn together. Not as a feared duke and forgotten duchess, but as equals, partners, family. In the quiet manor garden, Adrian held their newborn son carefully, while Evelyn rested beside him beneath blooming roses. The baby yawned sleepily in his father's arms. Adrian looked down at the child with wonder before meeting Evelyn's gaze. "I spent years protecting this house," he said softly, "only to realize you were the one thing truly worth protecting." Evelyn smiled gently through happy tears. And as sunlight filled Blackthorn Manor at last, the home once built on loneliness became a place overflowing with love, forgiveness, and second chances.